This hour of the Costa Report is brought to you by IBM. Big data at the speed of business.
Welcome to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and thank you for joining me for another 2 hours of straight talk radio. I want to welcome U.S. military personnel who are joining us over the internet today, especially those of you serving abroad. Thank you for your service and for being with us again. In just a few moments, General Barry McCaffrey will be joining us to offer a military perspective on the Bergdahl hostage exchange and help us better understand the instability in Iraq and surrounding countries. How should the United States respond, and how does Iraq and Syria, do they offer us a preview of what we should expect in Afghanistan as our presence diminishes? Today, we go straight to a general who has been on the front lines of Americans' foreign policy. But before McCaffrey joins us, as is my custom each week, let me tell you a little about his background. McCaffrey is a graduate of West Point and earned his graduate degree in civil government from the American University. He continued his postgraduate education at Harvard University, the National Defense University, the United States War College, the Command and General Staff College, and the Defense Language Institute. He has led U.S. forces around the world, from the Dominican Republic and Vietnam to Operation Desert Storm. The list of daunting assignments the general has been charged with is long. In fact, so long, the nation has seen fit to award McCaffrey the Purple Cross 3 times, the Silver Star twice, and the Distinguished Service Cross twice. At the time of his retirement, McCaffrey was the youngest general in the United States Army. His final assignment was as Commandant of Southcom, where he was responsible for U.S. military activities in Central and South America. And one thing you might not know is that McCaffrey is credited for the 1996 humanitarian operations of over 10,000 Cuban refugees, as well as the creation of the first Human Rights Council and Human Rights Code of Conduct for U.S. Military Joint Command. McCaffrey has served our nation as our representative to NATO, worked as a military instructor, and has been an active member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. But many listeners remember McCaffrey for his role as drug czar in the Clinton administration, a controversial position he held from 1996 to 2001. Today, the general is a national security and terrorism analyst and popular commentator on NBC and MSNBC, as well as a consultant and board member for several national corporations. It's my pleasure to welcome to the program a leader who the nation has turned to during times of crisis, General Barry McCaffrey. Welcome to the program, General.
Rebecca, thanks for that kind introduction.
Well, it's all true. I don't know how kind it is. It's all factual. General, I appreciate you making time to be with us today. And if it's all right with you, I'd like to open today's program by trying to get a handle on the Bergdahl hostage exchange. As you know, there have been any number of reports that he may have abandoned his post, and yet National Security Advisor Susan Rice has publicly stated that Bergdahl was, quote, an American prisoner of war captured on the battlefield. So I was wondering if you could explain to us laymen, does it make any difference if he was a deserter or not? I mean, in the end, aren't we just talking about making a trade to get a U.S. citizen back?
Well, Susan Rice is a brilliant woman, Stanford PhD, but that was an astonishing statement, as well as she was on he had served with distinction. Look, the deserter has a legal connotation. We rarely charge people with desertion because it means you left your military duties and you intended to never come back, and it's always difficult to prove that. So people, by and large, are charged with other offenses, absent without authorization. In this case, there are probably a dozen charges that could be brought against him since he was in a war zone, that sort of thing. But I think the bottom line is, factually, there's no question that he left his post in the face of an armed enemy, ended up in the hands of the Taliban, which I'm sure he didn't believe would be an outcome that would land him in their custody for 5 brutal years. And I think the media has done a tremendous job in sort of teasing out his background. He's probably a confused kid, sort of idealistic, might be mental health problems. We'll soon learn if there was a drug problem associated with it. Certainly that's been rumored on the internet. But the simple facts of the matter are he left his rifle platoon in combat and ended up causing a huge problem for us. It needs to be investigated, and then there's a two-star general that's supposed to do an Article 32 hearing, sort of the equivalent of a grand jury, to decide on charges. So we'll see how it plays out. But, rarely have I seen anything cause more controversy. It was sort of an open and shut case in one sense, but then the partisan politics in the background took over, and it's turned into a Democrat-Republican issue also.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's not surprising. Everything that happens gets turned into a Democrat versus Republicans issue. General, we're having a little bit of trouble with your phone line. It seems like you're breaking up a little bit. I'm not sure. Are you on a cell phone today?
No, I'm on a cordless, and that's not good.
Yeah, it's just breaking up a little bit. We can pretty much catch you, but maybe during the break we might ask you, the engineers might ask you to call back into the program.
Yeah.
This language, leaving your post. What does that mean? Under what circumstances does a soldier leave his post? I'm from a military family myself. I'm not familiar with the idea that my dad would have allowed me to leave my post.
Yeah. Well, essentially there's all sorts of standing orders in a combat zone. And by the way, this rifle platoon he was with was in a ferociously dangerous area. Courtesy of the WikiLeaks, I've actually read all the highly classified radio traffic in Afghanistan the day Bergdahl went missing and then was captured.
Yes.
To include intercepts of the Taliban talking to each other. The first thing the Taliban commander said when he was told that we've got an American soldier here in the village who said he's looking for somebody speaking English, the first thing the Taliban commander said was, cut his head off. And so any normal soldier would have said, walking off that post, unarmed, having left his weapon, his night vision goggles, mailed his stuff home to his girlfriend, they would have figured, I'm going to be dead within an hour. So again, it's an
This just doesn't sound like a rational human being who puts their weapon, mails their weapons, mails all this stuff home, walks into a village and that where there is obviously a massive security risk and says, does anybody here speak English? I mean, it doesn't sound like a soldier in his right mind.
Well, of course, that'll come out. We'll soon find. I think when you look at Bergdahl's background, he enlisted in the Coast Guard, got discharged in boot camp, started a lot of jobs where people thought he was a bit flaky. I think the kid probably had, I'll bet it turns out he had some altruistic notion that he could walk away, tell the Taliban he was on a mission of peace, that kind of thing. I anticipate that'll be the outcome.
So you think this was a bit of naivete?
I think so, yeah. And by the way, there's, in terms of punishment, nothing the U.S. Armed Forces could come up with would ever equal 5 years being brutalized by the Taliban. So I don't think it's a question of whether we punish Private Bergdahl or Sergeant Bergdahl. The question is whether we at least stand behind our principles and say, look, he can't walk away. And by the way, the other controversy is the notion of, do we trade 5 highly dangerous people for one soldier who was captured because of his own misconduct?
Well, that's something that I want to take time to address with you. We have to, unfortunately, take a hard commercial break here. But when we come back, let's talk about that. Should we even have hostage exchanges? So let's take that scheduled break, and we'll be right back with General Barry McCaffrey. You're listening to the Costa Report.
Did you know that every day we create 2.5 quintillion bytes of data, and that 90% of the data in the world today has been created in the last 2 years alone? This data comes from everywhere, and it affects everyone. This data is big data. Big data is all data, and it's more than simply a matter of size. Big data represents an opportunity to uncover new insights, make your business more agile, and answer questions that were previously beyond your reach. IBM's Big Data platform uses sophisticated technologies and patented advanced analytics designed to complement your existing information infrastructure. The IBM Big Data platform allows you to get started quickly today and expand to address more complex problems tomorrow. It doesn't matter where you start, it matters that you start. Find out how IBM can help you turn big data into a competitive advantage by visiting ibm.com/bigdata today.
Every day our world gets more complicated. Not only is new information coming at us faster than we can manage, new regulations, technology, and the effects of globalization have made it much more difficult to succeed. That's why I wrote The Watchman's Rattle, a book that, for the first time, explains how complexity makes it hard to separate facts from fiction, and eventually causes us to make important decisions based on unproven beliefs. And not just us, our leaders also fall prey to this phenomena. But here's the good news. Once you know the symptoms to watch for, you can safeguard against them. So please, go to RebeccaCosta.com, that's RebeccaCosta.com, and order your copy of The Watchman's Rattle. It only takes a few minutes and the shipping is free. That's RebeccaCosta.com. Do it now. You'll be glad you did.
Hi, registered pharmacist Ben Fuchs here. I've been studying healthy bodies for 35 years, and what I've got to tell you may shock and surprise you, but if you listen up, it may change your life. Fibromyalgia is a Latin term meaning muscle fiber pain, best thought of as a sign of toxicity, specifically blood toxicity. Dr. John Kavaris discovered that women given an injection of the blood thinner heparin reported that their fibromyalgia symptoms were dramatically reduced. He developed the hypercoagulation theory of fibromyalgia that postulated that sticky clogged blood following toxicity resulted in the deposition of clotting proteins and other poisons into the muscle. And where was the most likely source of the toxicity? The digestive tract, and specifically the small intestine. The small intestine is the home of the microbiome, trillions of bacterial cells made up of many hundreds of strains, and they make vitamins that help us digest our food and detoxify poisons. If there are long-standing digestive issues, especially in the processing of fats, over time, these proportions get thrown off and the wrong types of bacterial strains can proliferate. Because these bacteria are constantly secreting waste materials, eventually the body will mount an immune defensive response and an inflammatory reaction will ensue. Eventually the blood can become contaminated, and the major blood response to this kind of contamination is clotting. If you're suffering from fibromyalgia or inflammatory pain issues, try eating fermented veggies. I like sauerkraut and beets. Pickles are good too. You can make your own fermented veggies pretty easily, basically by mashing or cutting up veggies and adding some bacterial starter and salt. And you'd be wise to use a good probiotic supplement on a regular basis. And make sure you use a product that has multiple bacterial strains. Pharmacist Ben here, urging you to go to kscohealth.com to order Beyond Tangy Tangerine, the Healthy Start Pack, and other nutritional supplements that I personally use and recommend. You can purchase these premium quality products at wholesale prices online at kscohealth.com. That's kscohealth.com. I'm the pharmacist that believes that staying healthy and strong is not only about medicine, it's about giving your body the raw materials it needs to do its work. Go to kscohealth.com. Make sure you check out the cool videos too at kscohealth.com. That's kscohealth.com.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and my guest today is General Barry McCaffrey, and we were having a few telephone problems. I hear somebody came in and whispered in my ear that there are sunspots today. I don't know if that's true, but if there are sunspots, that certainly explains some of the technological gremlins that crawled into that phone line. So they're giving me the clear sign that the General has called back in. Just before the break, General, you were just starting to broach the subject of whether we should have made a hostage exchange at all. Let's take the fact that let's take all of Bergdahl's background, whether he was in his right mind, whether he facilitated the capture. Let's take that all off the table. Should we have made the exchange at all?
Well, you got to defer to the President of the United States on an issue like that. He and Secretary Hagel and senior people thought about it, decided it was worth it. I think the backdrop, a legitimate backdrop, was the politics of it. We're leaving Afghanistan. They wanted to clear the table. But I think clearly what's not at stake is any soldier we should try and recover, regardless of what the circumstances of their capture. But trading 5 highly dangerous people who clearly will represent a significant threat to the American people for Bergdahl was probably a bad deal. They should have had the CIA go offer $10 million in cash for the guy, and 500 soccer balls. They should have come up with something that didn't represent a threat to the American people.
I understand. When we say that we will leave no American behind, do we mean we'll leave no American soldier behind? Because I take issue with that phrase that was sort of bantied around by the press. We'll leave no American behind. For example, U.S. aid worker Alan Gross, you're familiar with him. He's serving a 15-year sentence in a Cuban prison for hooking up the internet on his computer without having the Cuban government's permission. And Cuba's been offering a hostage exchange for years. And we don't seem very interested in trading much less harmful Cuban prisoners for Gross. So do you mind if I ask you, what's the criteria for deciding who to trade for and which citizens aren't worth it?
Well, our sort of going-in position has always been we won't negotiate with terrorist organizations. We won't walk away from our principles. In fact, depending on the circumstances, we frequently do. And I think there's a political calculus in the Cubans. I spent 7 hours with Fidel and Raul Castro a few years back, a very interesting visit with them in Cuba. They're desperate to get back their spies that were captured and sentenced to long prison terms in Florida. So I think the Cuban lobby has been adamant to not do things for the current Cuban communist regime. That's complicated, but I think your larger issue is a good one. Is it just military personnel or is it all American citizens? We do have a public posture in the State Department that we try and help Americans regardless of where they are. But again, a lot of them, if you fall into the hands of a foreign government's legal system, no matter how deeply flawed it may be, the international legal aspects of it are there's not much we can do except have the consular officer visit them and make sure they're not being maltreated and they get a warm blanket and that sort of thing. There's Americans locked up all over the world.
Well, this is my point. We have Americans locked up all over the world. They've been locked up for decades. And so when we make a statement, we leave no Americans behind, don't we really mean active duty soldiers?
Well, I don't think we ever said we leave no Americans behind. What the administration kept saying and what the chairman of the JCS would reiterate was we leave no soldier behind. And they used words like a sacred obligation. Mm-hmm. And, I think, look, what happened in this case, President Obama and Dr. Rice and the National Security Council made a preposterous misjudgment of going out in the Rose Garden and announcing this as if it was a triumph. Instead of having the Secretary of the Army put out a 2-paragraph report that we just got Bergdahl back and we traded for the following 5 terrorists. Had they done that, they wouldn't have been then forced into the unbelievable series of statements they were then forced to make.
Why not do this privately, as you point out? Why didn't they just do this privately? As you point out, we've done hostage exchanges in the past, but we always did them very confidentially.
Well, I think they all looked at each other across the White House Situation Room table. They had 2 weeks of miserable press on the Veterans Administration. They said this. They actually, the word I'm getting from inside the White House, and by the way, these are smart people. These not stupid people. And I think they actually were astonished that it was greeted with outrage by the armed forces.
So you think this was a bad PR decision?
Well, it was more than PR. It was bad judgment. It was a misunderstanding of the nature of the armed forces. So when you had these great young soldiers in his platoon immediately coming up on the net and saying, we were outraged about this guy. By the way, all military operations stopped in Afghanistan for an extended period of time, and all they did was look for Bergdahl, which was the right thing to do.
And soldiers lost their lives looking for him.
Well, Secretary Hagel denies that. I think that's a misreading of it. I think there were casualties that were incurred without question during the search for Bergdahl. So you sort of wonder, when they're sitting around the White House Situation Room, didn't they ask somebody to call a sergeant major in his brigade and ask him how this Rose Garden ceremony would be viewed by the 2.3 million men and women of the armed forces, active guard and reserve? I don't know. It was just bad judgment, and then it forced them into endless nonsense trying to explain why they did it.
Well, on the other hand, what we're hearing on the other side is that it's opened up a successful negotiation with the Taliban, maybe the only one.
I don't even partially believe that. I think that is utter nonsense. The Taliban,
but the exchange did take place. I mean, we do have a successful completion of a obligation that was discussed with and executed with the Taliban.
No. You know what? The implication of the statement is that this moved the peace process along, and it moved a relation. The Taliban told us from the start, if you let go those 5 senior leaders you've got at Guantanamo, we'll give you back your private. And everybody in the government had said, no, we're not doing it. And then suddenly we did it. They got precisely what they wanted. This will not in any way dissuade them from their larger aim, which is to control the Pashtun areas of the country and ultimately all of Afghanistan. So basically it was a bad deal. But I personally defer to the commander-in-chief when it comes to, what do you trade for? What do you do? That's his call. The optics of it, though, just betrayed a insensitivity. We've got 60,000 troops killed or wounded in the war on terror. So, calling Bergdahl somebody who served with distinction and honor and, on and on was nonsense.
Well, it's a blow to the morale of our brave fighting soldiers that are there now. I think it's definitely a situation that has backfired. No doubt about that. And we're going to take another scheduled break. Stay right where you are. We'll be back with more from Barry McCaffrey. You're listening to the Costa Report.
The crisis in the Ukraine is the latest global conflict to pit the United States against Vladimir Putin's Russia. While the Cold War may have ended, U.S.-Russia diplomacy is here to stay. Understanding this volatile new era is not easy. For many years, experts have been trying to explain Russia's new leadership, but cracking the inner circle has remained elusive until now. The American Program Bureau represents some of the most knowledgeable and prominent Russian insiders who are available to speak to your organization. Experts such as Mikhail Gorbachev, former leader of the Soviet Union and master architect of modern-day Russia; Vladimir Posner, the dean of Russian journalism; Andrei Kozyrev, the first foreign minister under Boris Yeltsin; and Pavel Palashchenko, chief advisor for 25 years to Gorbachev, are available to speak at your next event. No Speakers Bureau offers greater insights into how Russia impacts our economy, our world, and our lives. To schedule these esteemed leaders for your next event, contact the American Program Bureau at 800-225-4575 or apbspeakers.com. Healthy Way Radio, we're talking to Fred today.
Hi, how you doing?
I understand you've already lost 6 pounds and you've only been on the program for 1 week this time.
Actually, a little less than a week. It's terrific. I feel great.
You tried this about 20 years ago.
I did. It's one of those things where I got into a groove and I stayed really healthy for a long time. Then I got to a place where I needed some help and I knew where to come. Came to Healthy Way.
What do you like about the Healthy Way?
I like the personal touch. Something I really like the fact that it's been in the same place for all these years. Obviously, it works.
You've had some health issues since the first time you came to us.
I got type 2 diabetes, and I noticed that my blood sugars already have leveled off a great deal.
And the program's easy for you to deal with?
Very easy. It's very simple. It's not complicated. The plan is laid out so you can understand it easily. And when you come here, there's always someone to talk to.
All right, Fred. Well, we'll be checking in with you periodically. Thanks for joining us on the Healthy Way today.
Thank you.
This could be you. Call 462-5900. Go in for a free consultation at The Healthy Way.
Hi, this is Ethan Behrman, a host on the ZBS Radio Network, and I'd like to introduce you to the all-new ZBSradio.com. ZBS Radio brings you a variety of talk radio programming on subjects like health and nutrition, politics, personal finance, gardening, pet care, technology, and so much more. At ZBSradio.com, you'll find podcasts, as well as live and on-demand streams of exciting and informative talk radio programming that's available to you 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on your computer or mobile phone. Listen on the web using our streaming player or in your iTunes or other listening software. Also, be sure to check the app section of our website to find mobile apps that make listening to your favorite shows even easier. Check the shows page at zbsradio.com to see our current lineup of shows. New shows will be added all the time. Thank you for listening to the ZBS Radio Network.
This year, firefighters like Fire Chief James Hall will battle wildfires around the country in hopes of containing them. But firefighters can't do it alone.
A single ember that escapes from a wildfire can travel more than a mile, where it can ignite and destroy your home and community.
Get fire adapted. Learn simple steps you can take now to reduce wildfire damage later at fireadapted.org. A public service message brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service and the Ad Council. Learn more at fireadapted.org.
Hi, I'm Greg.
And I'm Marlene.
We're from Flavors, the new food and wine show on KSCO, Sundays at noon. Our guest this week will be Susan Pappas from the True Olive Connection in Santa Cruz. We will be talking about olive oils, balsamic vinegars, sea salts, as well as doing some tastings.
Be sure to tune in and give us a call at 831-479-1080. And remember, flavor is everything.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and my guest today is General Barry McCaffrey. And before the break, you were pointing out the impact the Bergdahl hostage exchange has had on our military personnel, particularly the fact that he has been elevated as somewhat of a hero. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to move on to the situation in Iraq and Syria and the request for U.S. support. Again, as a general who's familiar with this situation, how should the United States respond?
Well, it's difficult to come up with a good answer, certainly. I've been in and out of Iraq and Afghanistan for the last decade. Essentially, Iraq is an ethnic civil war. The civil war doesn't just involve the ground area of Iraq, but Syria, Lebanon, the Iranian areas. It won't be ended by U.S. modest military intervention. We could probably sit on them, as we did with 150,000 troops, and largely kept the peace. But now we're out. I think the country is glad we're out. We shouldn't go back in. Certainly, selected use of air power is not going to turn this situation around. So we're in a difficult position. I think putting 400 or 500 people back in there will give us better intelligence on what's happening. We'll get assessment on the disastrous state of the Iraqi army. And clearly, we've got to get ready to evacuate a huge, overly large U.S. embassy, a couple of thousand people, if the situation got worse.
You say that the selective use of air power, like drones or other air support, really isn't appropriate right now. Can you explain why not?
Well, I think if you're going to use air power or military effort of any sort, you ought to write down your political objectives. Say, here's what I'm trying to achieve. And then select not just military, but economic covert action tools that you believe will achieve your purpose, and not just use them because it's a tool sitting there. So, if we wanted the U.S. Air Force and Naval Air to go after ISIS, this Sunni jihadist organization, which is principally in Syria, we could certainly do it. We'd put 2, 3, 4 naval carriers in the area. We'd try and get the support of someone who would allow us basing rights to attack them. But then we'd be attacking the enemies of Assad. We'd be attacking the enemies of the Iranians. So, you talk about a dilemma. But, casual intermittent strikes, this is not an industrial army. These are terrorist organizations, are primarily in the Sunni population. What we're really seeing, again, is an attempt by many of these groups, the Kurds and the Sunnis among them, to rewrite the map of the Middle East. And that's going to be what happens at the end of it.
So what is the right position for the United States to take? Is this a civil war that we don't participate in? We stand by?
I think so. I mean, the same thing's going on in Syria with tragic results. I mean, we're up to 180,000 some odd murdered in Syria. This Shia despot, the Alawite President Assad family, has owned that as a colony of theirs. There's an uprising of the large community of Sunni Muslims that he has repressed in a most brutal fashion. But so, could we intervene and destroy Assad's army? Could we have armed the Sunni rebels? I think the answer is yes. But you got to go to the American people. You got to say, here's what we're going to do. And then you have to live with the outcome. And that's the problem of dealing with these fractured societies, the outcome, as in Libya. I talk about dramatic example. Mm-hmm. Arguably, Libya is well off now than when that murderous despot Gaddafi and his family ran the country. So these are not problems that lend themselves to solution with military air power.
Right, because I think, as you're pointing out, there are unintended consequences on the back end, no matter what side we choose, and no matter what action we choose. You can't win. I mean, isn't this the bottom line? I mean, we can sit and talk about an objective. What objective do we want to achieve? And I agree with you. In business, you don't fund things until you know what you're trying to achieve. And I come from a business background. So to me, I understand exactly what you're talking about. But this is clearly a case where there's no winning.
Well, I think the major conclusion one should reach on the employment of U.S. military power is you have to go to the American people and explain what you're going to do. And if it makes sense, if there's a vital national security interest at stake, and you make an argument, historically, the American people always support a commander-in-chief in a time of danger. But it's a stretch to make that argument about Iraq or Syria, or for that matter, an enduring major presence in Afghanistan. So you can't use military power without the support of the American people.
Well, let's talk about that. In a time of danger, you can go to the American people. If there is no danger present, it's hard to make that case, particularly now. Now, President Bush said we either take the conflict to their soil or we wait for it, to reach ours. And 9/11 proved that eventually these threats will come to us. So given your experience leading campaigns abroad and also working on strengthening our security on the domestic front, what's gone wrong with Americans' foreign policy in the Middle East? What's gone wrong here?
Well, I think part of it is, to be blunt, and this isn't a Democrat versus Republican problem. We literally didn't think what we were trying to achieve. We took action. I'm very sympathetic to the initial military action against both Afghanistan, which is where 9/11 was conceived and organized from, as well as even the intervention in Iraq. There was the safety of the Gulf Coast states from Saddam Hussein. There's a good argument as to why you wanted to go into Iraq and put a new regime in power. Mm-hmm. But once we got into these efforts, it was being stuck on glue, and then we started gradually coming up with notions that we're going to turn them into a functioning federal government, and that's a 25-year task. And they don't work very well. They work great with the Germans or the Japanese, homogeneous population, educated, disciplined, scientific, etc., but they work less well with a 14th century society like Afghanistan or a brutalized internal civil war in Iraq. Again, military power has tremendous uses, particularly in deterrence. but it's not a great tool for ending ethnic and religious civil wars.
I'm glad you brought up that it worked in Germany and Japan. I grew up in Japan. I lived 16 years of my life there. Mm-hmm. And, we completely annihilated Japan, and then they became one of our strongest allies, and they rebuilt that country, and made it a major force in the global economy. I've always wondered why we didn't solicit more help from the Japanese in the Middle East. Why not, use them as a shining example of what can happen, what is possible, and get the Japanese to go over there as a living example of how to turn things around. I mean, is that too far-fetched?
Well, of course, Japanese were directly involved in Iraq with small military elements. They were trying to do humanitarian operations only. They literally, because of their constitution, were constrained in even defending themselves, never mind
that's
in
right.
the hostile environment. But, both Germany and Japan, which are shining examples now, remarkable people of economic progress, democracy, rights of women, I mean, you name it. These people are just astonishing. But those were homogeneous nations with a different culture.
Yes.
Poor Iraq never has been a country. I mean, that was the Sykes-Picot Treaty after, World War I between the French and the Brits, arbitrarily divvying up the dying Ottoman Empire. In Afghanistan, some Brit with 2 sherries under his belt drew the line down between Pakistan and Afghanistan.
And we are seeing the results of those 2 sherries right now. Now, unfortunately we have to take our last scheduled break, but stay right where you are. We'll be right back after these messages from our sponsors. You're listening to the Costa Report. Now, if you've been listening to the Costa Report, you know that I'm a big fan of wines by Caraccioli Cellars. And today I'm here with Scott Caraccioli, who's one of the brains behind the most memorable wines money can buy. So I have a question for you. How did your family get into the wine business?
2006, my father, his brother, and uncle were really playing with the idea of planting a vineyard, and planting a vineyard turned into making a bottle, turned into making sparkling wine when Michelle came into the picture. So it was really kind of an organic situation, us being in agriculture in the Salinas Valley, and then the extension of that went to grapes, and here we are today. To find out more about Caraccioli wines, visit us at www.caracciolicellars.com or stop by our tasting room in downtown Carmel, California. That's Caraccioli Cellars, Caraccioli, Cellars, where one bottle is never enough.
Do you love creating salads as much as you enjoy eating them? Hi, I'm Amy Tobin, cookbook author and culinary expert. Dole inspires fresh and wholesome dishes for any meal with their wide selection of salad blends and all-natural salad kits. From the mild and tender texture of sweet butter lettuce to the crunch of classic romaine sprinkled with colorful shredded carrots and red cabbage, Dole has over 30 salad blends to satisfy every palate. If you're looking for the ultimate in convenience, try Dole's unique salad kit combinations that include farm-fresh lettuces and vegetables, mouth-watering all-natural toppings, and specially made dressings. It's all you need to make a distinctively delicious salad. The possibilities are endless. Visit www.dolesalads.com for recipes and other ideas to feed your culinary imagination.
Classic Vapors Dry Cleaners presents the 5th annual Hot Rod for Kids, an open-class car show benefiting Jacob's Heart. Jacob's Heart's mission is to improve the quality of life for children with cancer. Enjoy great food, live music, raffle prizes, a kids zone, and more, with all proceeds being used to help kids affected by the disease. The event starts at 10 a.m. July 19th and will be held at the Santa Cruz County Fairgrounds. For more information, go to hotrodsforkids.com.
Hello? Hi, Grandma. No, Grandma, I can't fix your computer. I'm sorry it's so slow, but I don't know what to do with it. You clicked on what? You better call User-Friendly Computing, because they can fix any PC, Mac, or laptop. They'll even come to your house and pick it up. But if you bring it to the shop, they'll give you a free $50 diagnostic just for saying you heard their ad on KSCO. No, Grandma. Downloading that free internet software won't save you time or money. Let's face it, most of your computer problems these days start with the user being tricked into clicking on a link that contains a path to computer hell. User-Friendly Computing will have you back on track fast. User-Friendly Computing is locally owned at 505 River Street across from Gateway Plaza, or you can give them a call at 831-423-9653. That's 831-423-9653. Tune in to The Dave Allen Show every Sunday at 4 for an eclectic mix of guests, music, and hot talk that spins towards the positive. So if you're tired of confrontational bickering on the radio, take a step to the positive. Take a step with The Dave Allen Show every Sunday from 4 to 6 p.m. on KSCO AM 1080.
Welcome back to the Costa Report. I'm Rebecca Costa, and if you're just joining us, our guest today is General Barry McCaffrey, who was suggesting that the most prudent position the United States can take relative to internal civil wars in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and other countries may be to allow these countries to work out their own issues, which will likely lead to the establishment of new boundaries, territories, and nations, which may be long overdue. Is that right, General?
Well, I think so. You know, the notion of the Kurds, for example, as opposed to being a nearly already autonomous region inside Iraq, joining fully some federal government, it's just nonsense. It's never going to happen. They remember only too keenly being slaughtered by the Sunnis under Saddam Hussein, and they expect the same out of the Shia. So at some point, and by the way, oddly enough, Vice President Biden and the Council on Foreign Relations came up with this notion several years ago. You know, why don't we go to very loosely federated regions in which ethnic groups have their own National Guard, police forces, and try and remain autonomous from a dictatorial central government?
Why not have something like the United States, an affiliation of states?
Well, I mean, certainly it would be it'd be probably more like our Articles of Confederation than the ultimate Constitution that we had. Because, again, talk about naivete. When we call for a more inclusive government by Maliki in Iraq, he says, for God's sakes, you know, we were under the heel of the Sunnis for 50 years, and they murdered us by the tens of thousands. So that's just not likely to occur. There's no trust. There shouldn't be among many of these warring factions. And by the way, at the end of the day, what you really need to do is sit down and say, what are vital U.S. national security interests or economic interests or humanitarian interests, and write them down and then try and protect those crown jewels. We shouldn't disengage from the Middle East. They've got oil. We're engaged in protecting the Israeli security going forward, and should be. So we've got an interest there and ought to stay engaged. We also
how much do we need to protect that oil? I mean, we've got guys like T. Boone Pickens who've got a Pickens plan on the table. All we have to do is convert, I think it's 8 million or 18 million, I don't remember the number, 18-wheelers to natural gas, which we have plenty of, and we can be off of OPEC oil. And literally 12 months.
And by the way, we're moving in the right direction. We may be the leading oil producer on the face of the earth by 2020.
Right, but my point is this. It costs us so much money, not just in terms of the military, but just the dollars to keep the lines open to be able to have, oil from the Middle East.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, I mean, and we've got the capability to shut that right down.
Well, we need a national energy strategy. We don't have one. There are serious issues at stake between the environmental fringes and the those who pay no attention to environmental issues. So there are clearly questions that have to be resolved. And one of them, I might add, Rebecca, is you can't just use natural gas and domestic oil production. You've also got to use nuclear power. And after the terrible disaster in Japan, that has been pretty well knocked back on its heels. We've still got, fortunately, 103 nuclear power plants that produce a huge amount of our domestic energy. There's a few more opening in the coming decade, I think 5, all in the southeast.
Yeah, but those plants are growing old. They've already gotten extensions of 5 and 10 years beyond what they were designed for.
Absolutely.
So we do have a problem in that we're not building plants fast enough to replace those that are long past due.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're right about that. But the point that you made earlier, we don't have an energy policy.
We don't, and part of that is conservation. So if you fix America's train system, which, by the way, they're doing with private money now pretty effectively, if you fix our waterways and our ports and get bimodal transportation fixed, if you build mass transit that works in cities, you can walk away from some of these terrible problems associated with Middle Eastern or Russian energy supplies.
Well, this gets back to your saying, what is our interest? What is the interest that the United States has in the Middle East? And I understand protecting Israel, but let's put that aside for a moment. Do we really need to protect oil and our ability to get oil from the Middle East?
Well, we certainly do today. And by the way, as you well know, oil is sort of a fungible product. So the fact that we actually now get the majority of our energy comes out of Venezuela, Canada, and Mexico, not Saudi Arabia. But these are global oil prices, and so a gallon that doesn't come here is replaced by a gallon out of Mexico. You really have to pay attention to the Middle East, certainly in the foreseeable future. The Saudis have been a reliable ally. They're starting to have second thoughts about our value. But we can't – I don't think we should argue we should disengage in the Middle East. First of all, they're dangerous. We clearly need to continue to fund at greater levels the FBI, the Marshal Service, the Customs and Border Protection, because at the end of the day, we will see continuing attempts by terrorists to slaughter American citizens here at home. So that's an enduring challenge for security.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I do agree that we need to keep our intelligence and our lines of communication open there. But as far as getting involved in civil wars, I think the whole country is pretty fatigued about the Middle East right now, and it would be hard to make the argument that we should intervene. Unfortunately, we have run out of time for today. I could keep you for hours. I was just saying to our engineer, Sam, here, I said, boy, if I had to pick 4 people I want to have dinner with, I think McCaffrey's at the top of that list. So I hope if you ever get out here. Yeah, if you ever get out here in California, I'm gonna take you up on that. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But before we let you go, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your service to our country. Thank you, General, and hurry back.
All right. Good to be with you, Rebecca.
If your station is leaving us after this hour and you have a question or a comment to make about today's program, you can email me at RebeccaCosta.com or drop me a note on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and let me know how you felt about our conversation today with General Barry McCaffrey. As more and more about Bergdahl's past comes to light, the reason for the hostage exchange is likely to become more obtuse, especially given the fact that there are many other Americans being held hostage, and we've been approached to do exchanges, such as Alan Gross, which is being who is being held in Cuba for hooking his computer up to the internet without government permission. Can you imagine that? He's presently serving a 15-year prison term. That's Alan Gross. I want to say his name again because I don't want us to forget that we have Americans that are overseas and are serving hard time in prison and would like to return to their families. And the Cuban government has already offered to release him if 3 Cubans held in a U.S. prison were released. And those, I've heard this unofficially, those Cubans really represent very little threat or danger to the United States. By the way, if you missed the full interview with McCaffrey today or any of our other weekly guests, remember you can download previous episodes of the Costa Report from our website, Apple, iTunes, Podbean, and our new YouTube channel. And while you're at our website, take a moment to check out the new video of the first public debate on the Affordable Care Act and how it's affecting public and private health exchanges 6 months into the ACA. The debate is hosted by Fox News personality Juan Williams, and I'm one of the members of this controversial and really entertaining panel. So if you haven't seen the video yet, go to RebeccaCosta.com, and it's right there on the homepage. If you want to know what's happening to health insurance 6 months into ACA, this is the video to watch. I also want to remind those of you who have not picked up your copy of The Watchman's Rattle to click on the image of the book and order your copy right now. This is the only book which shows how complexity, overregulation, and more data than at any other time in human history is producing gridlock and a mass confusion between empirical facts and mere opinion. So grab your copy today, and it's right there. It's right there on the homepage. You just click on it. It takes you 1 minute, and all of the proceeds from the book go straight to keeping programming like you heard today with General Barry McCaffrey on the air. Next week, I welcome the president and CEO of the National Venture Capital Association, Bobby Franklin, to the show to tell us the facts about investments in innovation here in the United States and abroad. Where do we stand when it comes to investing in new ideas and companies? Find out next week right here on the only news program that puts policy ahead of politics. Now stay tuned for another hour of Straight Talk Radio. You're listening to the Costa Report.